Yo, what's up, everybody? I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do try to stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu. That's kind of up in the air right now, but fear not because it's always uploaded as a YouTube video under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, as well as being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. So please feel free to do that whole social media doobly-doo thing and leave that rating, like, follow, subscribe, review, whatever, depending on the platform that you're listening on. It really does help support the podcast, or at least we like to think it does. So, today I am back with Guardian from Team Blank, and we are going to be talking about what we think is going to potentially win Worlds 2025. Yeah, because it's technically the end of the 2025 season, even though, yes, I understand we're already a fourth way done. God, math is hard. A fourth way done with 2026. So, yeah, that's going to be the big topic. But before we get into that, we have the comment of the week. So if you want your comment to potentially be read, then you might as well just leave a comment about your thoughts of anything that we talk about in the podcast down in the comment section. And if we like it enough, we'll go ahead and read it. We might even read more than one, depends on the topic. And depends if we like the comment. And we do sometimes give priority to channel members, so feel free to become a channel member to have an increased chance that your message is going to be read. So I guess like tier-wise, it would be like channel members, subscribers, and then kind of just everyone else if I had to kind of just do a little ranking on priority. But again, that's just a minor thing. Not asking that of anyone, but it always helps. So,
We always appreciate you guys helping us out with this because we love to bring you more Digimon talking podcasts.
yeah, so this week's comment of the week is brought to you by Empire Youth. They decided to comment on the fact that we talked about Karakurumon on how it is one of the only cards that enables a free Digivolution, and essentially they just pointed out we were wrong. Um, the broad stroke of their comment was they actually were looking into Digimon that gives us free level 6. They found a handful, and then I decided to take that a step further, and I'm just like, if these are some of the other ones, what cards are we even missing on that
We
list?
kind of just dived into a rabbit hole, guys, on this one. We've divided these into three different categories on this: free Evo, conditional Evo, and free level 6 playing. These are the
Yeah,
three categories we've labeled out on these. What is the condition for getting out the level 6? How essential is it to get it? And how accessible?
right. Those are the primary factors because what's making Karakurumon and why I think this card is very bannable is the fact that it is just one of the easiest ways for puppets to get. I mean, yes, it's puppets more specifically, but how easy is it to actually get into a level 6? And that does impact the overall tempo and pacing of the game because obviously we've seen tempo and pacing issues on the ban and restriction list in the past where it's just like, oh yeah, this just enables a free Evo. That's too good. Which Karakuru also enables a free Evo. And I think like Karakuru is more specifically looking at like this
It
big
goes strictly
list.
for its OTK.
Well, it's not only just it goes strictly for a brand new OTK that Puppets has access to, which is relatively decently consistent because there's just a lot of search tech in Puppets. Because you have the generic options, you have the emblems, you have the Shushumon, or not Shushu, you have the Shumon, you have a Tamer. There's just consistency everywhere in that deck. So it's
Mhm.
not like getting into the OTK is that difficult, but the fact that, again, Karakuru is easier to use to get into whatever free level 6 is initially part of the problem.
Yes, of which we fall into the next culprit on this of the Infirmon. That until recently, when we got the Caramon X, hadn't had the ability to jump straight into Diabora that easily. Now that we have him, we can actually jump straight into Diabora without paying the cost at all, bringing us again into another level 6.
Right, and as we have seen from the U.S. Nationals, a Diabormon was able to get into top 16, and that's because it did actually have its new tech to create that free token, which is exactly the same play pattern that Karakuru is doing, which means that this play pattern is very innately strong and obviously causing some tempo issues with how the game is currently paced in order for it to accelerate itself to such a high degree to be able to get into a high enough placement. Granted, there's other things going on. I perfectly am very well aware that like Digimon is basically a combo game where it's not one job's specific card to get into a free evolution, but there are specific cards that by themselves or like mostly by themselves they state with some other conditioning because again Digimon's a combo game that you could get into a free level 6 Digimon. The
One of
earliest
these,
Yeah, the
sorry,
earliest example is Jagamon from BT1. So, like, yes, you can make the argument, oh, we've always had this from the very beginning of the game. Um, because Jagamon's when attacking ability lets you flip the top three cards of your deck and Digivolve into a green level 6 Digimon from among the top. Keep in mind, back then in BT1, we had no ways of rigging it, and the amount of green level 6 Digimon were also very limited, and deck design in of itself also was completely different from where the game currently is now.
yeah,
So,
we saw this thing get reprinted up and retrained all the way back in 7 with the Mama Heityramon, giving us the same condition, which now with both of those gave the Lotto. But we've also seen points to where there is just other conditions that have to be added up for free Evo, like the Metal Greymon Alterius mode and the Sagittarius Wargururu, where if they just see their opposite played or digivolved, they jump straight into their 6,
which
which
I,
just continues on the line.
yeah. Um, and like there's just a whole bunch of other examples because like we've seen free evos in BT16 with Doru Greymon where all it needs is the attack target to change, which the evolution line has a goading ability, so it's not necessarily the most complicated thing in the world to set up this like trap and digivolve during the opponent's turn, or it has collision in of itself, so it forces the opponent to have a redirect, which also would trigger its ability to digivolve into a level 6 Digimon for free. Um,
So let me ask you this, Zan. What else would you classify into this category of the goads?
I mean, you technically have like other Digimon that don't technically state on the card themselves that they digivolve for free, but they enable free evolutions through aces or like the counter timing. Like EX10 Metal Greymon is like one of the new ones. Such an annoying card. It's super infuriating. And we also had way before that EX5 Edamon. When they first introduced aces, that was like one of the best ways to bait your opponent into a ace play, and then depending on the ace, it's going to do some absolutely massive and devastating damage. Obviously, based on how we've been playing the game, it's a little bit harder for those cards to work now. Um, but when they were played and they were printed, they were incredibly obnoxious to play against.
I see. And now about the third category we talked about at early on of the played ones. Which ones would you say fall into that?
So the most obvious example is going to be something like Balmon, pretty much almost any of the Balmons. They have this condition to give or just have a on delete to just play out a free level 6. The caveat is one, the Digimon has to die. And two, you have to have the Digimon that you're going to be using. Sometimes it's from your hand, sometimes it's from your trash. But I mean, the Digimon itself isn't the level 6 itself isn't the important part. It's how you're going to be deleting your Digimon, and most of the time Purple has very easy ways of deleting its own Digimon, or you just leave it out and wait for the opponent to delete it, because depending on specific metas, whether blue or yellow or green are popular enough to be played, because they tend to have alternative removal types that don't trigger on deletes, then that kind of muddies these types of abilities. But the main factor is these Digimon have the ability to play out a level 6 Digimon for them leaving the field.
I see. Well, these are just examples of the categories we were going through. Now, on a side note, I
You're a
personally have
little
lived
ghosty.
some.
Hold on. All right. Try saying something now. Nope. Still ghosty. Or it's not like ghosty. It's more muffled. Is it your quartz connection?
Test test. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, that's good.
Sorry about that, everybody. But as I was saying, there is also other ones that deserve honorable mentions because the conditions they need are either really hard to get to or really easy to, such as the War Growlmon from BT21, which just requires every 10 cards for a reduce by 1. So at 20 cards in each graveyard from that specific strategy, you're able to jump into a Chaos Gallant or a Megidramon for free. This is just a conditional one that we decided to label as the honorable mentions.
Yeah,
If you
but
have others that you want to bring up, drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it.
yeah, but we have like a big list of everything that's pretty much causing free evos, and the list is actually longer than I was anticipating. And this is just for
Insane.
this is literally just for level 5 Digimon that states I can play out or Digivolve for free. Not not adding into any combo factors or whatnot, because believe me, yes, I'm very well aware that there's tons of level 5s that can reduce Digivolution cost that you could pair up with memory gain to equate to a free Evo. This is just cards themselves that basically states that this will allow you to Digivolve for free as read on the level 5 Digimon. Um, and
Yes.
and the funny thing is, the majority of these cards, like, they're actually pretty good in terms of their overall usability for what the deck was trying to do. Granted, not all of them are going to be good because not all of the decks are good. Like you have what is it, Locomon, that lets you Digivolve into a Grand Locomon for free.
Yes,
By
or the Imperial Virus stuff from BT20 that our commenter Empire Youth had mentioned, which just lets you jump into the dragon mode if Pyodramon would be removed.
Yeah, so the spectrum between good and playable and bad and unplayable is actually pretty wide in terms of what these level 5 Digimon are encompassing. But the thing that we found during our initial research on what else can pretty much enable free evolutions is when these cards were printed. Like, when did we actually start seeing these types of cards more and more? And like you could go back and look that the majority of these cards that enabled free evolutions themselves or stated on the card, um,
Roughly
throughout
came
the
out about
first,
the BT 17 and 16 formats, which were some of the highest grossing and fastest pacing of the format, because back then you had things like 7 Great Demon Lords, Angels running around. You had the beginnings of Gas. You even had stuff like Numemon X running about.
well, it really technically started like softcore BT like 12-ish era. Like, cause, but it really wasn't very prominent until around BT 14, BT 15 is when they started ramping things up, and then it's only gotten faster and faster from there. Which is the crazy part and staggering part of like how many cards are actually enabling these free actions to have, which in my perspective, free actions are incredibly unhealthy because it just increases the amount of combo play that you have. And B, the more powerful the card is and the easier the setup on using the card, just enables more toxic and degenerate strategies, like what we're seeing with puppets right now, and why I specifically said Karakuru out of all of the other cards need to get banned or limited is because Puppets has a wider toolbox of cards that it can use compared to something like Diaboromon. Diaboromon's a little bit more narrow. And Karakuru also has multiple enablers to get that extra body on the field for pretty much zero additional cost, where Diaboromon, again, needs one specific card in order to do that, and if you don't have the base Caramon, then you actually have to pay one to digivolve this into the raising area, which sometimes may or may not be a good thing or a bad thing. But either way, there's a very clear difference in card quality in terms of how the setup is and what the execution looks like. Granted, once Diaboromon's in his Diaboromon, it could be pretty oppressive at times, but so could Puppets.
A good recent example of this actually falls into the Dibermon that follows Time Stranger, where if it's on the stack with Bukamon, as soon as it unsuspends itself by paying that one memory, you're just jumping into a Neptune Mon before your Homeros even activates, which just virtually wipes out an opponent's field like it's nothing.
Yeah, Divermon's kind of a funny card because the idea behind Divermon was supposed to be played with Shellmon because it's like, okay, I'm going to use Shellmon to unsuspend the Divermon so that way they both can digivolve into their respective level 6s, which is cute and funny and all, but as we've seen in practice and tournament results from what little BT24 data we have, that's just not practical, and it's just easier just to use the egg to enable Divermon than try to set up the Shellmon. And yeah, Blue Time Strangers is actually a pretty decent deck. Again, mostly because it is not using the Iliad cards, it's using the Blue Titan stuff to be able to turbo into your Neptune Mon. And that turbo factor is, again, just the idea that the game is speeding up is part of where the tempo issues are. But it's always funny to think, like, Bandai can ban something that causes tempo issues, but then print, like, 5 cards in the next set that's, like, egregiously way worse than what they literally just banned. And by ban, I mean
the
ban and restriction.
Hisaryu from the more recent set of 24, where it just evolves if there's a tamer underneath it.
Um,
It gives that abnormal protection to where it's just attacks, reveal 3. Oh, look, there's a police or seeker. I evolve for free. Now I
well,
have initial protection as well.
Well, I mean, the way police is supposed to work is you're supposed to rig it yourself because you can do the whole black deck manipulation thing where it's just like, oh, I'm gonna put 3 cards to the top of my deck and oh look, there's the card that I was gonna use to get the free Evo. So like there's different setups. Same thing with like Oblivimon from EX11, where it's just like, okay, Invisimon swings 2 checks. First check, de-digivolve into Oblivimon. The security tech +1 carries over to Oblivimon. Oblivimon deals the second check, and then Oblivimon goes into security. So that way, at the end of the opponent's turn, if they didn't just manage to reach it, then it just plays out and it can digivolve for free. So, like, there's, again, a lot of different cards and a lot of different strategies that are making it relatively easy to be able to do this. And I think, like, the increased reliance on needing to do these free actions because of all of the tempo pacing issues that the game currently is facing, as I've kind of highlighted pretty much since BT14. I'm not 100% saying it is the training's fault, but I am 90% saying it is the training card's fault.
I still put Pata on that chopping block. He has been the bane of everything's existence since he came out.
No, and this extends like to other levels as well because like okay, these are just like 40 cards, like a list of 40 cards that are allowing free digivolutions to happen from a level 5 to a level 6. And again, as we pointed, there's like more different ways of free evolution or cheaper evolution. So, like, all this means is essentially we're not paying for anything anymore. And that's kind of the sentiment is like you'll pay on your very first turn or your second turn. Like, you'll set up your options and your tamers. And then after that, it's pretty much just go. It's just hit the gas, put your foot on the gas pedal, and then the combo train's just not going to stop until obviously the opponent is either going to die or you set up such an oppressive field that they can't reasonably play around it. And I guess like the sub game to the main game is trying to navigate how do I reverse kill my opponent or outpace them or figure out what holes in their protection I could use to be able to break their board. Because once their board is broken, like the game is effectively over. So, because it's going to take too long for the opponent to then restart and reset up everything, which if you outed their 6 with your 6, or their 7 with your 7, again, just depends on the different decks, or even their 6 with your 4, in Hoodie's case, then it just creates this whole, like, tempo gap that just magically makes the game end. And not a lot of decks are able to have instant recovers. Unless they're like a cross type deck where they just have the ability to just windmill slam a high level Digimon onto the table, or they pre-set up ways to be able to get back up into their high stage Digimon, which is what we're seeing with the scramble cards, why they exist. And a lot of the Liberator decks have like a lot of warping. So that's probably what makes Medusamon pretty decent, is the fact that like they use the Lamia to basically digivolve off their level 3 into a level 5 for 1 total memory, which is absolutely nuts in of itself and probably should be the card that gets hit if Medusamon's going to get hit. But yeah, it's play lines like that that just allow you to try to turbo back into your level 6 to have basically this like turbo hyper accelerated gameplay of like, okay, we're going to just keep trading boards until somebody just doesn't have the ability to rebuild, and then that person loses the game because they can't rebuild. That's if you're trading board states, which not a lot of decks do, and a lot of the good decks just elect to just kill the opponent outright and not even waste time trying to think about that type of gameplay. There are some decks that do that, but not a
No,
lot.
but so those decks that fall into that are obviously the Millenniummon, which utilizes Chimeramon to either spit out its ultra level in the Millenniummon, or its mega level in the Machinedramon, or in more popular cases, the Myotismon, which has its ability after being given blocker and retail by its previous version, letting X virtually block, die, and jump straight into Mallow and virtually mess up an opponent's board by either trying to delete them or bottom decking them.
Yeah, but it was really interesting to like look at exactly where a lot of these tempo and pacing issues started based on just this examination of the level 5s that grant free evolution. And like we kind of just pointed out, the majority of it really actually started at around BT 14, BT 15. Like that time frame is when the meta dynamics started to shift more towards that, and then it's only been accelerating, and we've only been getting more and more cards that do that type of an action since then.
Yeah, thank you, 16 and 17, for doing that to us.
Yeah, like that whole block was just an insanely huge power crept block. Because like in that block we also had EX5, which has committed so many war crimes against the game, it's not even funny. I think it's the set that has the second most amount of cards that are limited from it. The first one is obviously BT7, which that was that was a whole thing in of its nutshell, like in of itself, because that started the trend of digivolving into a level 5 Digimon for 1. So that's kind of where like a lot of tempo and pacing issues like realistically started, was like all the way back from BT7 with the hybrids, and that's what made the hybrids like incredibly strong. Blue hybrids just had the benefit of making the opponent's complete field utterly useless. But that's why like red hybrids sometimes creeps up, and like a lot of decks just need to pretty much digivolve for next to nothing in order for the deck to be as optimal as possible. Which I think is sad, because the memory system of the game is one of the biggest draws and appeals to it. And now we're getting to the state, not necessarily completely ignoring it altogether, because trust me, memory still does matter. But a lot of decks are able to do a lot more for a lot less. And that was like in some of my previous videos highlighting the issues with the game. The underlying issue with the level of power creep that has been in the game is decks just functionally do more. And that's why when they create new timing windows, like when moving, it just causes more issues, because now we're getting more effects out of our cards than we've ever had before. And that A, increases the complexity creep, and B, forces a lot of unincidental or partially incidental power creep. So that's kind of where this whole rigmarole kind of like stemmed from. So thank you, Empire, for spurring this interesting conversation through the lens of correcting me and saying Karakuru was not the only level 5 to grant a free evolution. It's just obviously the best out of all of like the 40 cards that we have listed on like a separate screen. So we're not going to get into all 40 cards, because believe me, that would be a whole headache in of itself. But yeah, there's like at least 40 cards that grant a free evolution or play out a free level 6 Digimon. So yeah, I guess this would lead into the greater topic, which is Worlds. So Worlds is going to be happening in like a week or 2 weeks as of the recording of this video. I think it's 2 weeks as of the recording of this video. I'm just double checking. Technically next week. Technically, but realistically it's a 2 week sense. So, but yeah. Worlds is happening. So this brings us to the question of, what do you think is going to win Worlds? Tell us your thoughts down in the comments below, especially if you agree with anything we're about to say or disagree with anything we're about to say. So
We always appreciate the opinions you guys give on this. We love reading them, even if we don't mention them on here.
yeah. So, Guardian, what do you think is actually going to win Worlds? Because we have a little bit of EX11 data, not a whole lot. So the majority of it is going to be like what was good in BT24, and then see where the meta shifts are according to what's doing well currently in EX11.
Yeah, so shout out to East over on YouTube on this one for coming up with his own ideas on this, but I'm actually more pointing towards what's been winning right now, which has been Vortex, Medusa, and Rocks right now. All three of these decks have been highly topping lately because they are just so oppressive with either ability to respawn, ability to just stay on the board, or just overall Digimon immunity. So these three decks honestly have been just slamming the format right now with what events they've been into with like locals and stuff because of how powerful they are. So as far as what I think would probably be winning this, I'm gonna honestly lean between Medusa and Vortex on that one.
Medusa and Vortex are definitely two very strong decks. I've been playing against them and play testing them, not like super extensively, because if anyone's been watching my live streams on YouTube, I do play a whole bunch of other different stuff, but like you do see that I do play against some of those decks relatively frequently, and they are definitely very strong decks. If anyone actually wants to know the current update of the Japanese format, which again, I always take with a ginormous grain of salt, and this is where a lot of East's data comes from, is the same data that I look at. Right now, Vortex is their number one deck, followed by Medusa, and then actually right now in third place is, believe it or not, Puppets. Puppets is in third place, and then, well, I guess if you really want to be realistic and get into the nitty gritty of it, technically any Time Stranger deck that's not Titans is the number one deck. Time Strangers has a whole bunch of different offshoots, but if you add all of the offshoots up together and just lump it in as Time Strangers in of itself, Time Strangers is the number one performing deck this format, or archetype. Then it goes Vortex, Medusa, Puppets, Rocks and Minerals, and Hoodie. So that's kind of like the big top like 5 or 6 decks that are currently doing well in Japan. You do have like Millennium that's doing okay, along with like Royal Base and Royal Knights as well. And then you also do have a little bit of God, I'm blanking. Galacti. Galacti is still a force to be reckoned with because the new Galacti is like actually insane. But outside of like those decks, not really that much has been doing well. You do see a little bit of Mastimon and Gallantmon because those two decks are just still insanely good. It's just their play rate is obviously less, so that means their showing is going to be less in terms of how good they actually are. But really, outside of those decks that literally I've just mentioned, they're lucky to see a topping. Like, they're just lucky to see a topping. At least that's, again, based on Japanese data, which the majority of it is like 3, maybe 4 rounds if they're lucky of best of ones, which I don't necessarily hold in the highest regard. But again, in this format where we don't have
We
any
honestly
data,
don't have much data because of the where we're at in this format.
right? We're just going off of like vibes after that. But so you think that either Vortex or Medusa is going to win Worlds?
Yes.
So I guess my big thing from a deck perspective is one thing, but a player perspective is another. I don't exactly know the full roster of players that are going to Worlds, but I think like specific people probably tend to favor specific decks, and because Worlds doesn't follow normal tournament conventions, and it's basically just this like overglorified super locals of just highly skilled players, I actually don't really have a solid prediction as far as what's going to do well. I mean, obviously, I listed off like what 10-ish decks that have the potential of actually doing well, at least in this current format. But again, I don't know where the meta call is going to be for a lot of these players. Like Ben's probably still obviously going to be playing Rocks because he did well with Rocks in BT24, and Rocks technically got better in EX11. So a player like Ben is most likely going to be on Rocks, but all of the people that won their Worlds invite from the first wave of Nationals that took place in the summer, like, they're all wild cards. Like, I have no idea what they're going to be planning and prepping because the game was dramatically different from when those players won their invite to Worlds versus the ones that won literally within the last month or two.
Yes, it's why I pulled that shout out to East because of the data he gave us on that, because that was the only real data we had on what possibly is going to be at Worlds. So, as far as the wild cards, they are probably going to be following their own beat on this, because by the time we hit there should be enough data between Americas and JP for us to get an idea.
I mean, our local
But
level data is like absolute trash. We can't
I'm not going to
organize.
deny that.
Yeah, we can't. I mean, part of it is America's just too big to organize. Like, I'm not going to lie, full stop. Like, America and the way that we perceive the game and the social dynamics in place, like, we're just completely different. So obviously, we're not going to hold any of our local data. Like, we're not going to host any of our local data anywhere because there's no point to congregate And like, even though there is a point to congregate, it's just stores and or players are just not going to put that effort into allowing that. Where Japan, they basically just use a hashtag, and stores use topping decks and like all that as like actual publicity. So like, again, just cultural differences, which allows us to actually grab some of their data. But considering, again, those cultural differences lead to player differences, it kind of mucks up and muddies the data a little bit, but it does give us a decent perspective, because both of us probably have played a decent chunk of EX11 to get like a solid vibe feeling.
Yeah, I'm not exactly pleased with how I did on that one. I got stonewalled by some of these decks that honestly just were just wild cards on that.
Yeah, I honestly think that Time Strangers is probably going to win Worlds. Some
You think it's gonna
variant
pull the same thing like our nationals?
some variant of Time Strangers is going to win Worlds. Not only right now is it the number one performing deck, but it has so many variants that players could really fine tune which version they want to play in order to do well. It's kind of like the hoodie thing, where it's just like, oh, hoodie has a couple of different ways to build it, even though the core of hoodie is all still the exact same deck. It's just those minor tech choices, which the deck has plenty of room for. Like, I guess it's not really minor at that point when you're changing probably about a good portion of the deck. But the fact that the deck has the flexibility to change itself enough to diversify the builds allows hoodie to be more prominent and better performing, because unlike a lot of the more traditional stack-based decks, they're one-trick ponies. Like, they literally are one-trick ponies. They do their one thing, and then that's it. Whereas you get these slop decks, as we kind of been mentioning in the past couple of episodes, these slop decks have build variants and a deeper card pool to allow them to outperform the other decks, especially if they're able to keep the same amount of tempo or generate more tempo faster than some of these other decks. So it's just like, okay, how is, let's just say as an example, Vortex Sherman realistically going to end up trying to do well when Hoodie and Time Strangers has removal options, and then other decks are also teching in removal options to be able to deal with Vortex. So I think, like, because Vortex is this format's gatekeeper, I don't think the gatekeeper ever holds the crown.
Eh, yeah, I could honestly see where you're going on that. But the other gatekeeper is obviously Medusa, who can actually hold that crown.
Yeah, Medusa, I think, has the possibility to hold that crown, because Medusa's tech, like, Medusa's speed and tech and survivability is just, like, absolutely insane. It's not unbeatable by any stretch of the word, and its OTK is significantly harder to pull off compared to a lot of other decks, because you do need to, like, have enough memory to be able to do everything you need to and make all of those attacks and be able to potentially keep turn and all that stuff. So but the survivability is also there, to where it's just like, I don't particularly need to OTK you if I just leave you in such a battered and broken position that you just can't reasonably fight back. And unless you're playing
Yeah,
like,
that's where Vortex likes to do that, though, is just leave them in a battered, broken position.
well, Vortex wants to turbo into Vortex, because if you're not a deck that has an out to Vortex, you just simply cannot get rid of that card. And I think, like, that's part of the appeal of Vortex, but I think, like, from a, like, high-level competitive event like Worlds, if you're not teching in against Vortex,
You're
specifically,
throwing?
you're throwing. You're like actually throwing. It's just like, oh, I feel like Time Strangers is going to be the most prominent deck, which it most likely is. So I'm going to tech
Won't deny
against
that.
Time Stranger. But
But
if you play against Hoodie, then you just get boned. Like, you teched for the gatekeeper, or like, no, I think I'm mucking it up. if you tech
You checked
against,
for
yeah,
one of the others that isn't the gatekeeper.
yeah,
You kind of are just slamming your self into that wall without climbing over it.
yeah, the point I'm trying to make is most decks don't have the deck space and card pool to tech for everything, whereas the slop decks actually do. So, like, that creates this dynamic on putting the slop decks above some of the others, which is why I think Time Strangers, being the latest, greatest, and newest and hottest slop deck, gives it that competitive advantage. Because let's just say you tech for Maruki OTK, just as an example. Well, what if they are not playing Maruki OTK? Then you just tech for the wrong deck, and now you're putting yourself in a worse position because now you thought they were something when they're actually something else. Or same thing with like, oh, I'm teching for like Olympus 12 Megazoo, but they're actually Aegeomon.
Yeah, but by teching for certain ones isn't a bad thing
No,
as
you
long
have
as
to
you
tech.
tech. You have to tech for also for the others. You have to look at, does this card affect this deck that I'm thinking is going to be a boogeyman? If yes, set it into a pile to where, okay, what other cards does this card affect? Stuff, good portion of these options and Digimon cards actually can affect multiple things of the meta. A good example is actually back in the ST22. There is an option card, the high speed plugin, which insane card on its own for 3 memory can stop an opponent from suspending their Digimon. On a number of these top playing decks, actually can really screw them over. Like if you hit the Neptune, it can't suspend to protect itself. If you hit Vortex, it can't activate immunity. On top of this, it immediately links into whatever Digimon and gives it jamming for you to just keep yourself in the game. So don't feel discouraged, guys. There are cards out there, if you look, that can actually work against
The
multiple decks.
Yeah, and it's just finding those tech cards. Like one of the ones that's like very easy that a lot of people just point to is Crimson Blaze, just as an example. If you're a red
That
deck or
card is
part
the be
red,
all end all.
yeah, if you're a red deck or part red, like there's almost zero reason why this format specifically you shouldn't be running a Crimson Blaze, which is why it turned into like a $5 card, and thank God it's getting reprinted because we don't need to be paying $5 for an uncommon.
Yeah, no, no. A good card for the Vortex ones for the mirror match that also works with multiple other ones is the offense plugin from ST. Because after they stack up their DP to a certain point and have their turn still, you can just immediately snipe another Vortex just because you can.
I mean, yeah, like the biggest thing is the fact that like your deck has to one be able you first have to find the tech, and then two you have to build around the tech. So we've seen in a lot of these top events, just like nationals that just happened. I'm gonna pick on Ben Ben again. He played a couple of different tech cards. His tech like the amount of tech space he had was literally 3 cards. There were 3 tech cards in his deck. 2 of them were Congos, and one of them was Justimon. And like that's all the space that he had to run for tech cards, and everything else had to be dedicated for the deck in order for the deck to actually function. So certain decks do allow more or less tech space, and it's just finding what you're willing to sacrifice for your tech. Is
See,
the
that's where
big
I'm gonna
answer.
point out on Sean for that one because I agree. I understand Ben's point on where he is on everything, but Sean had such an even tighter thing because he was on Mastimon, and he
Yeah,
had to just go through and be like, okay, what can I use? What can't I use? And it's why we got that insane buyout on the EX10 Mummymon's foils because of his insane tech that came through.
yeah, like, and that's like a good example of like a deck that doesn't have the flexibility to run a whole lot of tech. So he had to do a lot of research in order to get the tech that he did end up using, and that tech ended up carrying him very far because of the consistency and overall speed and tempo of the game is just so incredibly high. We're not like Yu-Gi-Oh levels of stupid.
We're not there yet.
Yeah, but like we're on the fast track to get there in like a year's time. Because like we already have the ability to pretty much just with very minimal setup get up into high stage Digimon and straight up OTK the opponent. So like that's why Maruki OTK is like so popular, is because it's kind of reminiscing on what Fen was doing, where it's just like, yeah, I don't really need memory in order to OTK. Everything I do doesn't really cost anything, or if it does, none of it actually matters. And like that level of counterplay is going to be very important on like, okay, they're a time stranger deck. I have to do things specifically to time strangers. So like it's going to be a very interesting meta on how it all develops for worlds specifically, because again, it's basically just a super locals just of like some of the world's current top players. But it's going to be very like you're not going to get like your very offbeat rogue decks is kind of where I'm getting at, is like most people are going to play more towards what's actually good in the meta. So I think like bless anyone's heart and soul, Dark Dragons, it could very easily be prevalent.
I don't see it.
Yeah, it's just like from like looking at the macro level perspective of where the game currently is at, it just doesn't make sense for them to do it. But because they already got their world's invite, like they could technically run some of the most wildest things that we've ever seen, being some of the biggest wild cards.
Uh, Honestly, I played Dark Dragons. I played against them. I don't see them having this because the stickiness is there. Yes, I'm not going to deny them on that. The biggest problem with them is their consistency. They are basically a lower version of Belphimon because they want four or less cards in your hand. And every one of their cards just says, hey, I want you put me in trash.
Well, they basically
And that
actually
just,
just play out of the trash. Like they don't actually hold a hand of cards. The tamer gives
no,
them
we're
their one
Infernity here.
option. Yeah, like their tamer gives them the one option or two, depending on how many cards, like how many tamers they actually have set up. That's what's actually giving them a hand of cards to play with. And everything else they're just basically trying to play or digivolve out of the trash. But the point that I'm trying to make is like it doesn't make sense for them to play that type of a deck, but they very easily could, because they can skew the data because they already have their invite. They already put the sweat into it, and if they just want to like goof around and take some offbeat deck, like they're allowed to do that. And then we look at it like it's in such a high regards, like because I think it happened like last Worlds, like
It happened too
somebody,
many times.
yes, some player in every Worlds plays some oddball goofy deck because that's like their pet deck, or they like it, or they think like this is the anti-meta deck that's very rogue but still very good, which there's a lot of them in Digimon. So I'm not going to say that that isn't a thing, but there's always somebody that tends to do sort of well with that offbeat rogue deck. And then we all look at that in the highest regards, where it's just like, oh my god, somebody took Dark Dragons to Worlds. Did you hear that, guys? Like, think of how insane that is. And it's just like, no, it's like a locals. So anyone could like just show up with it. It doesn't mean it's gonna win local or it's gonna win Worlds.
Yeah, I have opinions that would get me canceled on here, so I'm not gonna say much on it. But let's just say that we don't exactly follow great data when it comes to people just deciding, oh, I'm gonna bring my for fun deck because I'm already here.
Well, no, so the majority of people just don't know actually how to use data, let alone gather the data. Which is why, like, somebody like East and somewhat of myself, we actually try to construct the data that is given into a more digestible format, because, like, gathering everything up and doing not necessarily the mathematics or computations, but throwing it all into a spreadsheet and then just counting, like that's not the difficult part. It's just nobody really wants to put the time or effort into doing that. But that's what
Mm-hmm.
gives us who do those meta results and meta reports a slightly, I don't want to say deeper insight, but like a slightly deeper understanding of the dynamics of the meta that we're going to be talking about in the context of what we're talking about. So, like in East's case, it's all Japanese data. It doesn't actually currently reflect the actual state of the current game. Only Bandai has that. And just like how I usually only report on the English side of things, because that's the data that I use and I gather, and that's what I'm going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Although the English side has definitely been very lacking in the data department
The
recently.
there has been a lot of players that have just jumped ship from the from the not east side, from our side because they have just ran into the wall of not fun. So
Well,
it's not exactly great on this,
I know we're not like I feel like we're gaining as many new players as players are leaving. So I think
especially
from
with
a growth
8001 around the corner.
Yeah, I think from a growth perspective, we're like fine. The game is relatively stable, but the power creep is definitely something that really needs to be addressed. Like hardcore needs to be addressed. And like the answer is literally as simple as they just shouldn't do it, but like obviously they don't have the ability to check their work as we've said. Increased amount of sets means that the designers usually want to work 2 to 3 sets ahead, so they can't reasonably check everything so quickly before it actually gets printed and released. So, like, that's why more sets generally means worse game balance. And worse
It's
game
also
balance
why we
leads
point
to
out
poor health.
It's also why we pointed out in the last episode that we just need more ban lists to come through. Honestly, a lot more ban lists would make the game feel different.
It would make it feel better to play because then we don't have to like deal with 8 months of hoodie slop and have that be lingering over competitive players' heads. And
Hootie needs to
like,
die.
yeah, so like it's gonna be really weird. Like I do think like Hoodie definitely is gonna be at Worlds. I think people are going to tech less for Hoodie as a result because like certain play patterns and strategies, like having a card like Crimson Blaze kind of just covers a lot. It doesn't cover everything because obviously it doesn't exactly cover Vortex because Vortex can play Digimon out by effects. They just most of the time aren't. Um, and it's better to do just other things in Vortex. But I digress, and like that's why it's going to be incredibly important to make sure that whatever you're
As of
trying to
golden.
tech is going to be impactful for what you're arguably. I always like to say tech for your worst matchup because
Deck for
then
the worst, pray for the best.
basically, yeah. Because like if you are a Vortex, instead of running the Warper, because the Warper just plays a card by an effect, and that might not necessarily accelerate or enhance your gameplay or strategy. What you could do instead is like tech the Rapidmon that gives you protection from. I think it gives you protection from Digivolve and being
It
deleted.
does.
Does it protect from deletion?
I bel Hang on, give me a sec. I got the thing still open.
Yeah, I have
Rapidmon.
to check that.
Uh, if you have a green tamer, it can't be deleted or returned. It does not protect you from Digi. So
Uh,
it virtually makes it to where you can't die by an effect or
No,
be
so
bounced.
so the important thing about Rapidmon for like Vortex is the fact that it's straight up just being deleted, which means it severely limits options from actually removing your Digimon. So like and it comes with Digivolve, which as we know is one of the best alternative removal
Keywords.
types in the game. So it's just like, yeah, instead of playing Warper, Vortex probably should play Rapidmon instead for this type of environment, even though Rapidmon costs more and isn't really very well searchable in the deck. The benefits that it could give you probably would offset or offweigh the weaknesses especially if you feel like you're going to be seeing a lot of potential Medusa mons, just as an example. Because then Rapid Mon gives you that clean answer to the Strachio, and then the Rapid Mon gives you protection from options, so if they're trying to use Raging Serpentine, you're now protected against it, where before you might not have been.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna deny that, and the fact that the rapid actually does help. The pay four just hurts a bit, but Vortex does have its chance to actually search it through with just its basic option cards that it's already running. So a one of, maybe a two of, isn't a bad thing.
No, I mean, and that's realistically a lot of where current stack-based decks only have slots for. Like, they don't have the amount of just mixy matchy, timey-wimey, wobbly wibby wobbles as like slop decks, where it's just like, yeah, I could just choose not to play XYZ sub package, and then instead I just run ABC sub package instead. So it's just like with Hoodie as an example, it's just like, yeah, I could choose to play the Venusmon, or I could choose to run Pyldramons. So it's just like you as a player have that choice on what your tech is going to be, and the tech extends to more than just those, but that's just a base example of like, okay, so if I'm running Venusmon, now I can consider running a more option heavy package to then try to counter XYZ decks that I'm expecting to see. Whereas if I'm running Pyldramon, then I'm probably not running the option package, and instead I'm running extra consistency tools, so that way I could prepare for ABC type decks. And like, that's one deck being able to cover different instances where, as we kind of just pointed out with a lot of the stack-based decks, it's just like, oh, where's my tech space? I could run one different level 5 and maybe one different level 6 and maybe one different option. And that's kind of all the space that I have, because so much of the deck needs to be built in order to function, and then tech for the other stuff. I think it's like a classic management phrase for do the best that you can. Like, I'm gonna butcher the management phrase, but essentially it boils down to like, do the best and prepare the best for what you can, and then manage what you can't. So like, the tech is them trying to manage what they can't, and obviously they don't have the deeper tech pool compared to the slop decks in order to achieve that. So I
Yeah.
still think like Hoodie is going to be like very prominent. But I think like for where the current meta is and how the game's currently paced and playing, I do think that everyone's going to have to tech against Vortex, which is like really shitty, but like they have to, otherwise they just straight up lose to Vortex. So the decks that are going to do well against Vortex, are already going to be a leg up compared to every other deck in the current environment. And then it's whatever can win off of that is kind of just where I think like the meta is going to end up developing for them. So that's why I think Time Strangers is gonna take it, because they have all the tools needed in order to handle pretty much everything in the meta. Literally.
Yeah.
I think the only bad matchup Time Strangers might have would be Medusa. Like, truly and honestly, I think Medusa's like really their only hard negative. And I don't even think it's a hard negative. I just think it's a harder matchup compared to a lot of other stuff, or the mirror.
Yeah, Medusa definitely is one of those harder to deal with decks that just make it an overall problem.
Yeah, because if we're looking at what the top decks again currently are from the Japanese data we have, obviously Time Strangers is number 1, Vortex Warriors is number 2, Medusa is number 3, Puppets is number 4, Rocks and Minerals is number 5, Hoodie is number 6, Millennium, believe it or not, is number 7. And then you have what is this? I think this is I don't know how this is number 8, but They have Ex Machina as number 8. Um, and then number 9 is Galacti, and number 10 is well, I guess number 9 is like tied between Galacti, Bees, or no, Bees is number 9, and then number 10 I believe is Royal Knights, like Aquas and Royal Knights.
Yeah, and then down at the very bottom there, you got Massimon, which has a potential.
Yeah, Mastimon's probably like their 15, but I'm not saying Mastimon is bad. It's just obviously it's currently not the favored deck.
No, by far it's not.
So, I mean, Sean would probably argue that like it's still one of the best decks in the current game, and I'm not gonna fight that fight because yeah,
I will.
I'm not going to fight that fight because he knows more about Mastimon being a more Mastimon dedicated player. I know he plays other decks, but he's been on an absolute tirade with Mastimon. But, like, yeah, so the big thing, looking at a lot of these decks, Tamers, like, the awkward thing about a lot of these decks is they kind of have this underarching theme to them where they're doing really kind of just one of two things. They're playing Tamers and they're DNA digivolving. Like DNA digivolving is like incredibly strong right now. Just because the Tamers play the Digimon for free, which then gives you a free evolution. Yeah, that's kind of like the problem. BT16 kind of started this whole trend where DNAs are just getting like absolutely cracked if they have a Tamer that could play their Digimon for free.
Yeah, not gonna deny that.
So, and like we look at a lot of the other decks that aren't DNAing, and they're all still super Tamer reliant. So it's just like, oh yeah, all of the Liberator decks need their Tamer in order to one, activate their level 5 Warper, and two, warp into their level 7. Which, granted, unironically, the only one at this point that really feels like it's skipping its level 6 is Rocks. Everyone else kind of just wants to use their level 6. I guess technically you do have Vortex that does sometimes skip their level 6 to go into a fast Vortex. But like arguably their level 6 is where their alternative removal is for when Vortex just can't deal with a threat. So yeah, they're probably the other deck that uses their level 6 warp. But most of the time, you're not trying to warp into Strachio because the Medusa value is just too high. And then Puppets isn't even warping at all because none of the Chaperos are good. Like, almost none of them. It's kind of sad.
But they're doing their own little jump, skip, and hop over there using the fact of the level 5. So
Yeah,
they're pretty already, they're having pretty fine over there.
yeah, they have their own workaround for it. And they're kind of still forced to use their level 7 because their level 7's like literally one of the only things that's checking Vortex. Because I've been saying this for a while, and like after playing enough of Vortex and against Vortex, Vortex feels incredibly Magnamon X coded. Like very hardcore Magnamon X coded, where it's just like, yeah, when this thing comes onto the field, it's like actually kind of a nuisance.
Kind of?
If you're not one of the few decks that have the few answers, yes. Because you have to remove that thing by options or force lingering effects to be able to impact it.
Its
Like
biggest
those
threat is blue.
yeah, but blue right now is like nowhere to be seen in the meta. Like outside of blue time strangers and like blue being a thing in other decks, like blue's not really in a good spot right now, and I think that's a shame because I would probably make the argument and say that blue makes healthier formats because then you don't get a whole bunch of on delete degenerate bullshit. That
Uh,
it's true though. Like you look at what
do I have to
was
point out, do I have to pull out Mirage and just be like, this is unhealthy?
Mirage is perfectly fine right now. I mean, like
I was referring back to when he was not.
the only thing that was making Mirage not okay is, again, the tempo issues that Mirage came with. Mirage was a self-contained level 6 Digimon that basically, for his stat line, Digivolved for 1 or 2 memory most of the time. And that was incredibly powerful back all the way in BT 14-15 land, and arguably BT 16 land, but BT 16 is when he started to get phased out, before Bandai just rug pulled everyone who was playing him. Not really rug pulled, it was a very obvious ban and limit. But like, this is kind of where, like, not to harp back to bans and limits, like, because as far as what's going to win worlds, like we already listed like the top decks that are most likely going to do well and show some representation at worlds. We've already said what our number one deck is potentially going to win worlds. So to kind of like slightly backtrack to last week's conversation, it's just like power creep in Digimon is like such a bitch that a deck like Gallantmon is struggling because of not only just how much faster decks have gotten, but like how decks are playing just inherently are able to get around the protections of Gallantmon X Antibody, which was one of the biggest appeals to him, where it's just like, okay, if I don't kill you, there's a high chance you're not able to get around my protection. Like, the amount of end of turn make an attack that is like texted throughout the game recently is like absolutely absurd. Like, it is legitimately insane how much decks are doing for how little. Like, just look at Dan and Yuki as an example. It's like, yeah, it's not
Free option.
yeah, it's one, free option, and two, free attack at the end of the turn. Pair that with the egg that unsuspends, and you're guaranteed a free attack at the end of your turn every single turn. And like, that leads into why Gallantmon kind of started falling off, is because like his protection was was memory based. It's like, oh, but if I'm always passing over
Memory
memory,
based and digi based, you
yeah,
could not escape options, which is why the effects of the TS options kind of forced him out. Stuff like Sonic just straight said, "You're out of here."
yeah, and like, the thing is, like, Gallantmon is still a very good deck. He's still within probably the top 20 decks of Digimon currently based on Japanese data. But I know that's a bit of a stretch. Oh, there's 20 good decks. It's like, no, if you actually look
There's
at the
20
data,
playable decks.
yeah, there's like 20 playable decks, but realistically, there's like maybe 6 actually good decks, which we've already listed a couple of times. So there's realistically 6 playable decks, and then everything else is kind of just like, this is decent. It could do things.
Have a chance.
Yeah, there's a chance. It has specific matchups, but its matchup spread needs to be incredibly kind for it to actually excel. But regardless of that, it's like, okay, a lot of people are like thinking what's going to be on the next ban and restriction list. I probably need to make like my own personal separate video on that outside of what we did in the podcast, because I have more thoughts than what we probably just covered, or I want to like consolidate the thoughts that we did go over. But anyway, I digress. This next ban and restriction list, as I keep saying, is going to be incredibly important because it gives us insight into where Bandai wants and thinks the game currently is. So, like, Growlmon X, as an example, is a card right now that is not seeing a whole lot of play because Gallantmon is not seeing a whole lot of play because the meta has literally power crept past him. So, like, obviously, if we hit some of the top decks, then Gallantmon could be considered once again, which means now Growlmon X is a potential problem. Or is it? Because we have the next stuff that's going to be coming out, and then that's going to push the power creep even further because of, like, they were basing that set off of where the game currently is, which is where they're trying to ban and restrict cards, except they usually almost never ban and restrict cards based on where the game currently is, and they base it off of where the game was. So, like, I really don't know what to expect out of Bandai's ban and restriction list, but like there's very clear problems that Bandai is not addressing, and the amount of power creep is trying to basically sweep those issues under the rug, but the rug can only hold so much garbage underneath it before like the mountain of trash actually is like more blatantly visible. And I feel like Digimon is getting
Yeah.
to that point where they really need to clean out what's under that rug and stop putting things under that rug. And by that, I mean, like, they really need to start understanding the power creep that they are putting into the game, even though they don't have the time and availability to actually understand that. It is the never ending problem of a card designer, but like, again, I've worked as a card designer for about a year. I have some experience when it comes to this stuff. Um and the answer is simply just don't. Like, oh, why do we need to put end of attack on everything? It's because these couple of things started doing it, and it increases the playability of and usability of the cards. But as a result, the game is now moving faster and faster and faster to where now we could get turned to consistent OTKs again. But they've already acknowledged with Fen that turn to semi-consistent OTKs is not healthy. So like I just don't know and understand Bandai's thought process and thinking on we could ban this one card, but then we make this whole new strategy that basically does the same thing as what this old one kind of did, just functionally better. Like I just don't know. I really don't. Which is why I'm like waiting on bated breath to see where this ban and restriction list is going to go. Because no offense, this is going to sound really bad. I really could care less what actually wins Worlds. I really could. And I know that sounds absolutely terrible.
No,
But
not really.
but Worlds as a whole doesn't impact me, and the format that they're playing is a flash in the pan format because we're going to be getting 8001, which introduces a whole bunch of new cards into the game. Well, not really a whole bunch, just a small handful. And then when national season starts up, we're already playing BT25. So, like, what Worlds is playing is interesting, but from a player's perspective, completely and utterly irrelevant, other than patting myself on the back because I called something correctly, which I'm at this point don't really care if I'm right or wrong. I have an opinion, I'm stating my opinion, I'm giving a thorough explanation as to why I reached that conclusion into my opinion, and that's it. People either agree or disagree. Most of the time, knowing me, they disagree, which is perfectly fine because we all have our own opinions.
Yep.
But yeah, I again, I know that's incredibly like awful to say, like, oh, you should care about World's data because, and I'm just like, World's data just doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. What really matters to me is more so, obviously, the ban and restriction list that's going to be coming, and what Bandai is going to be printing to either make the game better or make the game worse. And I'm hoping the game gets better. Like, I'm really hoping. I'm not trying to sound super doomer here, but like we're reaching problematic territory faster and faster.
The sad but true part about that is the fact that if nothing is done, we are running into a big existence problem with the card game that's going on. So,
Well, I mean, the competition for card games is already incredibly fierce. We already see Bandai already cannibalizing their own games by printing more games. And there's still other games outside of Bandai games that people could play. Not saying people should play them because I think Digimon is one of the best mechanically built games. Like, its core rules and mechanics and systems is very easily one of the best in my perspective. It's just very clean. It's very efficient. There's potentially good, healthy back and forths that could be made because of the memory gauge system and how players are supposed to be playing and interacting with their cards. Like I
But there's
like
not
it.
much interaction really in the Bandai card games, which makes it a bit of a problem on that.
Well, so this goes into the whole power creep issue where it's just like the best strategy most of the time is to lock the opponent out of playing the game or win before they could even play the game. Like honestly, that's the two things that you have to do in order to be a playable deck is win the game super quickly and super efficiently or just tell the opponent what you're doing just functionally doesn't matter because what I did was just better.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very sad state for the game to currently be in. And the game has been progressing into that gameplay more and more, and it's only getting quicker and quicker as they introduce more and more types of effects. I know a lot of people are going to be really hyped for the fact that Beelstar from BT25 has a counter ability, but again, that's on the current counter window that we have. So on attack, delete your Beelstar. You don't get your counter. Have fun with the ability that you have that just didn't do anything. Um, like that's ultimately the reality that we're looking at when it comes to that type of thing. I know Three Musketeers does have some protection, and they could easily print more protection. So not saying that's going to exactly be the case, but currently that kind of is the case. Where it's just like
Yeah.
cards just do so much for so little that it's like honestly kind of absurd.
And there's nothing much we can really do about it in the end of it.
No,
We can make
unfortunately.
our videos for days on this, but the ultimate part of it is the fact that we have to just give our opinion. We're just stating what we'd like to see done. If it gets done, it gets done. If not, well, we try. Am I
Yeah,
right?
basically like that's why I speak up on the topics and be critical even though nobody likes hearing critical thoughts and opinions that are only trying to make the game better because they perceive them as negative. It's just like, oh, you're just a doomsayer. It's just like, no, I'm being realistic. I'm looking objectively at what is going on, using my eyes to read the cards and using my own personal experience on how the game has been played and progressed. After the countless dozens upon dozens of hours I put into the game on a weekly basis. Um, because like yeah, it is. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's like my job to play Digimon, because I'm not even a full time YouTuber technically. Um, but like I do put in more than your average player's amount of playtime and hours and thought into the game because I have designer experience and because I like and enjoy the game enough to want to keep playing it more than the average person. Which, yes, arguably did cause a lot of burnout last year. Not gonna lie and not gonna deny it. But again, that's just a testament to like how bad the game has gotten to where I, a person who loves the game, just cannot stomach it. And that makes me sad more than anything. So I'm really hoping the biggest winner of Worlds are the Digimon players themselves. We need the win. And by winning, Bandai needs to wake up and stop power creeping the ever living hell out of the game. Otherwise, we eventually are going to reach the ungodly world of consistent turn 2 game overs. And we're already at consistent turn 3 game overs, and those already feel unfun and anticlimactic.
Yeah. And me as a Mastodon player, I'm a part of that turn three pace because there are just some decks that by turn three will just say your security is no more and this is game.
Yeah, that's why like Ukomon is such an unhealthy card, and like there's a whole bunch of tempo issues where we just digivolve incidentally for free, set up free tamers. Granted, we've been setting up free tamers for a while, but like more ability to set up free tamers and gain free extra value off of the tamers. Like the fact that now tamers are starting to gain memory is like already kind of spooky. Again, granted, we've had that in the game for quite a while, but having it be more prominent where it's just like, oh yeah, now this tamer is going to start plussing me on memory is like actually kind of nuts to think about, where it's like, oh, that's what? No, cards have costs on the cards for a reason. Why are we ignoring that? Like,
Either way, the general point of the episode is what everyone thinks is the deck that is going to win. The generalized, overpowered locals that is Worlds.
yep. And like we said, I think it's Time Strangers, and you think
I
it's
personally am
Vortex?
on the Vortex or a Liberator deck that actually makes it.
Yeah, one of
In
the
the end, it's player ability that gives us the answer.
yeah, it's player skill expression, deck building creativity, and the RNG of the matchup spread. That's ultimately going to decide who ends up winning Worlds. But like I am hoping for, I want the players to win Worlds, and by players I mean every normal person. I want the game itself on the player side to have the biggest win. That's my
Yeah.
takeaway.
And I agree on that because Bondi, if a card game doesn't have players, it is not going to be successful. We've seen multiple games come and go time and time again because the gaming companies either got too greedy or just did not have enough players.
I mean, Digimon's very far from that. Like, Digimon is literally Bandai's second best card
I was
game.
just following on the fact that the players are the winners on that one. I
Yeah.
wasn't specifically attacking Digimon there.
I mean, like, yeah, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is definitely bleeding players, and they're not able to retain players, and they have a pretty big player base still. Um, but who knows?
I was more referring to Bandai's previous project of with the Panini Dragon Ball Z game
I mean, Bandai
with how
has a
it just
lot of dead card games.
yeah with how popular that one was back when I played it, and it just died the moment Bandai put their greedy hands on it.
I mean, it doesn't really shock or surprise me because that came out in like the era where everything was a cash grab and nothing was a well designed game. And we're kind of in the opposite where everything's a well designed game while also kind of just being a cash grab. But not really, but also still a cash grab at the same time.
Mhm.
But I believe Bandai can turn the ship around and make the game better. And hopefully we get some really good news and announcements at Worlds. And that's all I really am hoping for.
Yeah, because ultimately it is up to Bandai as the creators of these games to listen to their community
Yeah,
and hopefully help us make it better.
because I'd rather not have the game turn into a Dragon Ball Super Masters situation where that game is like so
No,
ungodly untouchable that like it's just not even an enjoyable game or experience, and you just can't even think about getting into the game if you're a new player. Like that's the route I don't want to go down. And unfortunately that's the route we're slowly creeping towards, and by slowly I mean we're on a bullet train heading that way.
it's sad but true on that.
So not to try to leave things on a down note, but I think we've already said our pieces. So thank you everyone for coming out and listening. It really does mean the world to us because again, without you guys, we would just be two guys rambling into the ether that is the greater sphere of the internet. So,
Indeed, guys, indeed. So, just as always, remember to drop those comments down below. Let us know what you think will win Worlds, what your thoughts are. We would generally love to see, read them. And if you're lucky, you may get on the next episode where we point out and call you out on it.
Yeah, because I would do like a whole comment section read along thing, but like
That
sometimes
would take an
depending
hour
on
at least.
yeah, sometimes depending on the episode, that would take up the whole episode in of itself. Well, it might be interesting every now and then. Um,
With Nationals being next week, we could always do that.
yeah, like if we don't have a topic, I'm not against doing it. So that's why your
What are you
guys'
guys' thoughts on
feedback,
this?
yeah, your guys' feedback is always appreciated, which is why we keep asking for it. Um, but to keep certain episodes more concise, that's why we only select one or two to read off.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, thank you all again, and we will see you all in the next episode. Later.
Yep. Thank you all for coming.